The man who tied a 4-week-old puppy to a wooden footbridge railing and left her there before sunrise was facing felony animal cruelty charges 31 days later, one security camera at a trail parking lot, one woman who ran the same 4 miles every single morning, and one puppy who had been hanging over a creek for 3.5 hours before anyone found her. Here is what happened. Going to start by telling you something about the route I run because it matters for everything that follows. I am 47 years old. I live alone on a rural road in Western Virginia, about 6 miles outside a small town that does not have a Starbucks but does have two feed stores and a church that has been there since before anyone alive can remember. I work as a physical therapist at a county clinic. I have been divorced for 4 years, and I do not find that fact particularly sad anymore. I have a house that I own outright, a garden that I mostly kill, and a morning running habit that started as something a doctor told me to do and turned into the part of the day I protect most fiercely. Every morning, 6 days a week, I leave my house at 5:50 and run 4 miles on the same trail, through the tree line, along the creek, over the wooden footbridge at the midpoint, back through the meadow, home. I have run that trail 400 and something times. I know the sound it makes in different seasons. I know which section gets muddy after rain and which board on the footbridge creaks near the left railing. I know every inch of it, the way you only know a place you have moved through alone in the dark, in every weather, for years. On the morning this happened, I left my house at 5:52. The light was thin and gray. It was early spring, the kind of cold that feels personal, and I had my headlamp on because sunrise was still about 40 minutes away. I hit the tree line at the 6-minute mark. By mile 2, I was warm enough that I had pushed my sleeves up. I was coming up on the footbridge at mile 2.1 when I saw something on the left railing. I slowed before I understood why. I want to describe the specific quality of light and sound on a trail at 5:52 on a spring morning because I think it matters for understanding what stopped me. It is the kind of quiet that is full rather than empty, birds starting, water moving, the particular smell of ground that is warming after a cold night. You are alone in it, and you are known by it in the way you can only be known by a place you return to consistently. Nothing is background, everything is present. Which is why the thing on the railing registered before I could name it. It was wrong in the way that anything out of place is wrong on a route you have memorized. Not frightening yet, just wrong. And that wrongness was enough to slow me down before my brain had caught up to what my body already knew needed attention. Something was hanging from the wooden rail between two of the upright posts about 18 inches above the surface of the bridge, small, white with black patches, very still. I stopped running. I need to tell you about my neighbor before I tell you what I found, because my neighbor is the reason this story exists. He lived across the road from me. I will call him Mr. Garrett. He had a large black pickup truck that he kept waxed even when the road was muddy, which in rural Virginia is a constant and losing battle. He was in his mid-50s, retired from some kind of regional contracting business, and he had the specific confidence of a man who had made a significant amount of money doing something that required no one to tell him he was wrong. When we passed each other at the mailboxes, he was polite enough. He held doors, he waved from the truck, but there was a quality to the way he held himself in any conversation that communicated, without him needing to say it directly, that he was not particularly interested in what you were about to say. I want to be specific about what kind of neighbor Mr. Garrett was, because it matters for understanding how someone arrives at a decision like the one he made. He was not unkind in the way of someone who enjoys cruelty. He was unkind in the way of someone who has never been required to consider anything inconvenient. His world had organized itself around his preferences for long enough that he had confused preference with principle. When something was inconvenient, it was wrong. Not wrong in a moral sense, wrong in the sense of being an imposition on the natural order, which he experienced as centering on himself. About 3 months before this happened, his dog had a litter. A purebred female he kept in a kennel beside the house, border collie, beautiful dog. She had 6 puppies, and Mr. Garrett, from what I could observe in the weeks that followed, was not pleased about it, not in the way of a person who had planned for it and found it more complicated than expected, in the way of a person who considered the situation an imposition. I asked him about it once, at the mailboxes, because the puppies were visible from the road and I had walked over to look at them through the fence. I said, "Those puppies are gorgeous. What are you going to do with them?" He said, "Find them homes before they eat me out of house and home, or find somewhere for them to go." I said, "If you need help rehoming them, I know a few people." He said, "I got it handled." He said it the way people say things when they want you to understand the conversation is over. I understood and walked back to my house. That was 6 weeks before I found one of those puppies hanging from the footbridge railing at mile 2.1. She was tied to the railing with a length of nylon cord. The cord was looped around her body, just behind her front legs, not around her neck, which was the only reason she was still alive. She was hanging about 2 feet above the creek surface. The water was low that time of year, moving slowly over rocks. If the cord had been longer, or if her weight had been more, she would have been in the water. Instead, she was suspended in the air, swaying slightly in the wind that moved through the bridge, eyes open, breathing. I got my hands on her immediately. I pulled her toward me over the railing and held her against my chest with one hand while I worked the cord loose with the other. She did not make a sound while I did this. That frightened me more than if she had cried. 4 weeks old, and she had already learned that making noise did not help. I put her inside my running jacket, zipped it most of the way, and called 911. The dispatcher asked me to describe the situation. I described it. She stayed on the line. I said, "I need animal control and I need to know if there is a vet that does emergency calls in this county." She said, "We have an emergency animal services line. I am transferring you now. Do not hang up." While I waited for the transfer, I stood on the footbridge and held the puppy inside my jacket and looked at the railing where the cord was still tied. It was a slip knot. Someone who knew how to tie a cord had tied this. It was not a desperate or careless thing. It was a deliberate, specific thing. The puppy moved against my ribs, small and persistent and warm. The county animal control officer arrived at the trailhead in 18 minutes. I had walked back to the parking lot because the trail was too narrow for a vehicle, and I needed her to see where I had come from. Her name was Officer Delray. She was in her late 30s, unhurried in the way of someone who has responded to enough bad situations that urgency is a tool rather than a state of being. She examined the puppy while I held her. Dehydration, elevated heart rate, no structural injuries. She estimated the puppy had been there between 2 and 4 hours based on the dehydration level and the temperature that morning. Officer Delray said, "Did you see anyone on the trail?" I said, "No, I run this trail at the same time every morning. I haven't seen anyone at the footbridge in months." She said, "Is there any kind of camera coverage near here?" I said, "There is a trail camera mounted on a post at the parking lot entrance. The County Parks Department installed it about 2 years ago. It covers the lot and about 20 feet of the trail approach." She said, "I will need the contact for Parks and Rec." I had it on my phone. I had been on the county trail maintenance volunteer list for a year and I had their number. I gave it to her. She said, "You kept the cord." I said, "I put it in my jacket pocket when I untied her. I thought you might need it." She looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone who has spent a career dealing with people who did not keep the cord. She said, "Thank you. I am going to pause here and tell you something that most people do not know about animal cruelty law in Virginia, because it is the mechanism that turned this from a bad morning into a criminal case. Virginia Code Section 3.2 through 657 covers cruelty to animals. Basic animal cruelty is a Class 1 misdemeanor, but aggravated animal cruelty, defined as willfully inflicting inhumane injury or pain that is not the result of a bona fide scientific or medical experiment, is a Class 6 felony. And critically, abandoning an animal in a situation that creates a substantial risk of death or serious physical harm is treated as aggravated cruelty under the statute. Hanging a 4-week-old puppy from a bridge railing over a creek before sunrise and leaving is not a misdemeanor. It is a felony. The person who does it can face up to 5 years in prison and permanent prohibition from owning animals. Additionally, Virginia's companion animal statutes require any person who abandons a companion animal to either surrender it to a shelter or to someone willing to provide care. Abandonment in any other manner is a separate criminal violation. Mr. Garrett did not know any of this when he drove to the county trail parking lot at 5:17 in the morning, or if he knew, he did not believe it would apply to him. He was wrong on both counts. The Parks Department camera footage came back within 48 hours. Officer Delray called me. She said, "We have a vehicle on the footage, a black pickup truck arriving at 5:17 a.m., departing at 5:26, 9 minutes. The driver walked toward the trail with something in his arms and came back empty-handed." I said, "Can you describe the truck?" She described it. I did not say anything for a moment. She said, "You know this vehicle." I said, "I believe I might. It sounds like my neighbor's truck. He has a purebred border collie who had a litter about 2 months ago. The puppy I found looks like a border collie mix." She said, "I will need your neighbor's full name and address." I gave her both. She said, "Do not contact him about this before we do." I said, "Understood." I did not contact Mr. Sid Garrett, but Mr. Garrett contacted me 2 days after the camera footage was reviewed. I was in my garden when his truck pulled up to the road in front of my house. He got out, he walked to the fence line. He did not come through the gate. He said, "I heard you found a dog on the trail." I said, "I did." He said, "I hope it's doing okay." I said, "She is at the vet. She is recovering." He said, "These things happen with animals. Litters get out. You can't always account for where they end up." There was a long pause. He was watching me with the specific expression of a man who was waiting to find out how much I knew. I said, "Officer Delray with Animal Control has been handling the investigation. If you have any information that might be relevant, you should call her." He said, "I don't have any information. I'm just being neighborly." He got back in the truck and drove away. I went inside and called Officer Delray and told her about the conversation. She noted it in the file. What happened next is the part where Mr. Garrett's confidence became his liability. Animal Control interviewed him at his home 4 days after my conversation at the fence. The interview was recorded. He told them his dog had had a litter and that all the puppies had been placed in homes. He said he had not been near the county trail in months. He said he could not explain why his truck appeared on the camera footage. He said these things knowing that the camera footage showed a truck matching his vehicle's description and plate number. He said these things knowing that his dog had had 6 puppies and that he had placed exactly 2 of them, and that the other 4 were unaccounted for. He said these things in a recorded interview. Officer Delray obtained a search warrant 3 days later. On the property, Animal Control found the mother dog in the kennel in poor condition, underweight, and showing signs of ongoing neglect. They found records of 2 puppies sold. They found no evidence of the other 4 puppies being placed or transferred to any shelter or rescue. When confronted with the warrant findings, Mr. Garrett changed his account. He said the puppies had been difficult to place. He said he had left one at the trail bridge because he thought someone would find it quickly and take it home. He said he had released the other 3 in a wooded area near a residential development about 8 miles away, believing they would be found. He said he thought he was solving a problem. Officer Delray said in her report, the subject appeared to believe that his intentions mitigated his legal exposure. He was advised that they did not. The search for the 3 remaining puppies began immediately. Volunteers, local rescue networks, the county's animal control team. Flyers went up. A community Facebook group that I had posted in the morning, I found the first puppy, became the coordination center for the search. I had posted a photograph of her, white with black patches, small and damp-looking, wrapped in my running jacket, and asked if anyone knew where she had come from. I want to tell you what the 48 hours after the confession looked like. I posted in the local community group at 6 a.m. Once Officer Delray told me it was appropriate to share that additional puppies were missing. I described what we knew. By 8 a.m., 43 people had shared the post. By noon, it was at 200 shares. People I had never met were driving through the area Mr. Garrett described, walking through brush, calling softly to something that could not yet respond to its name. My neighbor Carol organized a volunteer grid system. She printed satellite maps from her laptop and assigned sections. She had done search and rescue work years ago, and she still knew how to run one. She said, "We go in pairs, we cover the outside of the grid first and work inward. If you find something, call the number on the sheet. Do not move it until animal control arrives." I said, "Thank you for doing this." She said, "You started it. I am finishing it." That post had 347 shares by the time I found out about the other puppies. Two of the three were found within 4 days, one by a family who had seen them near their backyard and thought they were strays, one by a volunteer searcher who found it under a pile of brush at the edge of the wooded area Mr. Garrett had described. The third puppy was not found alive. I am not going to describe that in detail because I do not think it serves anything. What it did was change the charge. The death of the third puppy elevated the criminal exposure. Aggravated animal cruelty resulting in the death of an animal carries enhanced penalties under Virginia statute. Mr. Garrett was charged with 4 counts of felony aggravated animal cruelty, one for each puppy he had endangered or killed, and 1 count of animal neglect for the condition of the mother dog. His bond was set. He was released pending trial, but prohibited from possessing any animals during the proceeding. His dog was surrendered to a rescue organization. She was underweight but healthy and was adopted within 3 weeks. The trial was not dramatic in the way people expect courtroom things to be dramatic. It was methodical. The camera footage, the interview recording, the search warrant findings, the veterinary documentation of the puppy's condition when I brought her in, the necropsy report on the puppy that did not survive, each piece placed in sequence until the sequence was undeniable. Mr. Garrett's attorney argued that his client had acted out of ignorance rather than malice, that he had not understood the severity of what he was doing, that he had believed someone would find the puppies quickly. The prosecution played the recorded interview, the part where he said he had not been near the trail in months, the part where he said his puppies had all been placed, the part where he gave an account that was contradicted by physical evidence, a time-stamped camera recording, and his own subsequent confession. I want to say something about the 3.5 hours the puppy spent on that railing before I found her, because that number stayed with me throughout the legal proceedings. 3.5 hours. Sunrise was at 6:49. She had been there since 5:26. For an hour and 23 minutes, she was hanging in darkness, then in gray light, then in the early sun that comes through low and long in spring and hits everything at an angle that makes the world look both beautiful and indifferent. She hung there through all of it, small and still and present in the way that things are present when presence is the only option left. When the prosecutor read that number aloud during closing arguments, the courtroom was very quiet. 3.5 hours. She said it and then she stopped and let it sit. "That is what the evidence establishes," she said. "That is what this animal experienced while the defendant drove home and had coffee and waited to see what would happen." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. He was convicted on all 5 counts. He was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, substantial fines for each count, permanent prohibition from owning animals in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and mandatory completion of a court-approved animal welfare education program. He did not serve prison time because it was his first criminal conviction and because the judge weighed the mitigating factors as the law required. I am not going to pretend I was not disappointed by that. I was. But I understood the legal reasoning, and I understood that what he lost, his animals, his record, and the version of himself in which he believed he was a man who did not do wrong things, was real, even if it was not a jail cell. I kept the puppy. I thought about the name for a long time. She had come to me from a bridge. The bridge was where she had nearly not made it. It seemed to me that the right name acknowledged the place. I named her Bridge. My friend Carol, who is practical about most things and sentimental about dogs, said, "That's a hard name for a dog. It sounds like something bad happened." I said, "Something bad did happen, and she made it through." The name is not about the bad thing. It is about the making it through. Those are not the same. Carol thought about that for a moment. She said, "Okay, I get it. Bridge is 7 months old now. She goes on my morning runs with me, the short ones, the 4-mile trail route. She is fast and she is focused and she does not like squirrels in a way that is genuinely inconvenient, but also impossible not to find funny. She is the first dog I have had as an adult, and she is, in ways I did not anticipate, very good company. I run that same trail every morning. We go over the footbridge at mile 2.1. She always slows down at that section of the railing, not in a frightened way, more like acknowledgement, like she knows something about that spot that I also know, and we are both noting it as we pass. I do not know if dogs experience things that way. I am not qualified to say. What I know is that every morning when we cross that bridge, something in me settles, like the route is complete in a way it was not before. My mother, who is 73 and has had dogs her whole life and has very fixed opinions about most things, drove up to visit 2 months after the trial. She met Bridge in the kitchen. Bridge put both front paws on her knees and looked at her with the specific seriousness that border collies bring to every situation. My mother said this dog is looking at me like she has something to say. I said she does that with everyone. She is very intent. My mother sat down and put her hands on Bridget's face and looked back at her for a long moment. She said, "Dogs know things about people that people don't know about themselves." I believe that. I said, "I think you might be right." She said, "You did a good thing that morning." I said, "I ran my route." I do that every morning. She said, "You ran your route and you paid attention and you stopped when something wasn't right." That is not nothing. A lot of people keep running. She has said versions of that sentence my whole life in different contexts about patients I found difficult, about a divorce that needed to happen, about a job that was not right. You paid attention and you stopped when something was not right. She says it like it is simple. Maybe it is simple. Maybe the complication I add to it is my own. I have thought about that a lot since she said it. Because she is right that a lot of people keep running. I have been thinking about why I didn't, not as a virtue. I do not think stopping when something is wrong is extraordinary. I think it should be ordinary, but it is not always ordinary. And understanding why it is not is the more interesting question. I think the answer is the route. I think the answer is knowing a place so well that you notice when something in it is different, that you have been present enough, often enough, that the wrong thing registers immediately and without doubt. You do not talk yourself out of it. You do not decide it is probably nothing. You stop. 400 and something mornings on that trail made that possible. That is the thing I keep coming back to. After the trial, I was contacted by a Virginia-based animal welfare organization that was working to strengthen the state's animal cruelty statutes and wanted to document cases where the existing law had been applied successfully. I spoke with their legal team for about an hour. I gave them permission to use the case as a reference in their legislative advocacy work. Two of the other puppies, the ones found alive during the search, were adopted by the families who found them. The rescue organization tracked the outcomes because they track all of them. Both puppies are healthy, both are in homes. The family who took the one from their backyard sent me a photograph at Christmas, which I did not expect and which I looked at for a long time. The mother dog, whose name I learned was Nell, is living with a retired couple about 40 miles from here who foster border collies. She has gained weight, and she is learning slowly that people are not a source of unpredictable things. That takes time. Her foster family has the patience for it. Mr. Garrett sold his house and moved out of the county within 6 months of the conviction. I do not know where he went, and I do not think about it much. His truck is gone from across the road. The kennel beside his old house is still there, visible from mine, empty now and already starting to weather. I look at it sometimes on my way to the mailbox. I want to leave you with something specific, because this story is not only about one man and one puppy and one trial. If you find an animal in distress, abandoned, injured, in a dangerous situation, call 911 immediately. Do not move on. Animal control can respond to non-emergency calls, but 911 is the right number when there is immediate danger to an animal's life. Document everything before you touch anything if you can do it safely. Take photographs, Note the time. Keep any physical evidence, like a rope or cord, in your possession until authorities arrive. You are likely to be the only witness, and your documentation is the foundation of anything that follows. Know the animal cruelty laws in your state. Most people do not. Most people assume animal cruelty is a misdemeanor and that the consequences are minor. In many states, including Virginia, aggravated animal cruelty is a felony. Abandonment in a life-threatening situation qualifies. The law has teeth. It requires evidence and documentation to use those teeth, but it has them. If you know someone with a litter they cannot manage, connect them with resources before it becomes a crisis. Most counties have animal shelters that accept surrenders. Most areas have breed-specific rescue networks. Most of these resources are free, and the people running them have seen everything and will not judge. The absence of those connections is what turns a difficult situation into a criminal one. I also want to say something about documentation, because it is the practical thing, and the practical thing is what saved this case. When I found Bridge on the bridge, my first instinct was to get her and go. My second instinct, 4 seconds later, was to photograph where she had been before I moved her. I took it before I untied the cord. It showed the railing, the cord still attached, the position above the water. Combined with the cord I kept and the camera footage, it built the foundation of the prosecution. When you find something wrong, document it before you act if you can do so safely. The moment you move something, the original condition is gone. 3 seconds, and your phone is the difference between a feeling and a fact. And if you run a route, or walk one, or drive one, know it, pay attention. The ordinary thing you do every morning is not just exercise or commute or habit, it is presence. It is the thing that makes you the person who stops when something is wrong. Be that person. Bridge and I will be on our trail tomorrow morning at 5:52. We will cross the footbridge at mile 2.1. She will slow down at the left railing for a moment, the way she always does, and then we will keep going. If you have ever found an animal that had been abandoned or hurt, what did you do? And if you have ever been in a situation where you had to decide whether to stop or keep going, I want to know what made you stop. Leave it in the comments. I read every one.